Get your hands off my daughter. Amara's voice cut through the Whitfield Foundation gala like a blade. 200 people stopped talking at once. Champagne glasses froze midair. The string quartet went silent. Callie had Zuri by the wrist, her nails digging in hard enough to leave marks, dragging the 17-year-old across the marble floor in front of everyone. Wine soaked the front of Callie's white dress. She did it on purpose, Callie said, chin high, eyes glassy. She ruined it. I didn't touch you, Zuri whispered. Her voice shook not from guilt, but from the exhaustion of a child who had learned the truth never mattered in this house. Richard reached them first. He didn't look at the ruined dress. He looked only at Zuri. Apologize to your sister. Amara pulled her daughter free, gently, the way you take something precious out of a fire. Nobody is apologizing for something that didn't happen. She turned to the man she'd been married to for 19 years. Ask her what actually happened before you decide. I don't need to ask, Richard said. His voice was flat. I know my daughter. The words landed wrong, not our daughter, not even Callie, just my daughter. Leaner glided over in blue silk, already gathering Callie into her arms, murmuring comfort into her granddaughter's hair the way she had done 1,000 times. And in that moment, Amara saw it clearly for the first time in 15 years. Leaner had never once touched Zuri that way. Not once. She's had a difficult night, Leaner said to the watching donors, not to Amara. Callie's very sensitive. Amara's voice dropped. She grabbed my daughter hard enough to bruise her, in front of 200 people, and you're calling her sensitive. No one answered. That was the part that stayed with her long after the music started again, the silence. 15 years of it, and she had never heard it until tonight. If this story is already pulling you in, hit subscribe now and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I promise you this story is going to earn every minute you give it. Later, in the car, Zuri stared out the window with her arms crossed over her chest, hiding the marks like they were something shameful instead of something done to her. You don't have to keep defending me, Mom. Nobody believes you either way. I believe you. Amara reached over without looking and took her daughter's hand. That's the only vote that's ever counted. Doesn't. Amara didn't answer that. She didn't trust her voice to hold steady, and Zuri, at 17, had already learned more about disappointment than her mother wanted her to know. She thought about the beginning, the way you do on nights when the present cracks open and lets the past come pouring through. 19 years ago, she'd been 26, brilliant with numbers in a way that made men uncomfortable, sitting across a negotiating table from a struggling textile importer named Richard Whitfield and a quiet, watchful Korean investor named Seo, who had said almost nothing during the entire 3-hour meeting except, at the very end, looking directly at her instead of either man across the table. Your restructuring plan is the only intelligent thing anyone has said in this room today. She remembered the way that had felt, actually seen, for the first time in a boardroom that had spent 3 hours treating her like a well-dressed calculator. Minyi had asked her to dinner. Richard had asked her to marry him, 4 months later, on a balcony with a view he knew she'd never forget. She had chosen the man who offered her a future she could build with her hands, not the man who watched her like she was already whole. She had never told Richard how close it had been. She wondered, sometimes, if he even remembered Minyi existed. She had spent the first 6 years of the marriage rebuilding Richard's father's dying import business from the inside out, renegotiating supplier contracts at 2:00 a.m., learning trade law she'd never studied in school, and flying to factories in 3 countries while pregnant with a daughter Richard hadn't wanted yet. By the time Whitfield Textiles became Whitfield Global, the analysts credited aggressive new leadership. Nobody outside the company ever learned that leadership had her hands, her instincts, and her sleepless nights folded into every decision. Richard's name was on the door. Amara's judgment was in the walls. They'd adopted Callie during the hardest of those years, when 3 miscarriages in a row had made biological children feel like a door quietly closing. A baby girl, 8 months old, surrendered by a young mother neither of them ever met. Amara remembered holding her for the first time in the agency's fluorescent-lit waiting room and feeling something settle in her chest that she'd been sure was love, uncomplicated and total. She had never once, in 15 years, thought of Callie as anything other than hers. 2 years later, against every doctor's prediction, Zuri had arrived, furious and healthy and undeniably Richard's and Amara's both, a small dark-eyed girl who from her first breath seemed to demand the world take her seriously. Amara had believed, foolishly, that love simply multiplied, that a family only grew larger, never divided. She was beginning, at last, to suspect otherwise. The investigator's name was Renata Cole, and she had a voice like gravel and eyes that missed nothing. Amara met her in a coffee shop 3 neighborhoods from the Whitfield estate, somewhere she was certain no one from the gala circuit would recognize her. "You said you wanted background only," Renata said, sliding a folder across the table. "Financials, associations, standard due diligence before the inheritance vote. That's what I did. And I found things that go a little past due diligence." Renata tapped the folder. "Your husband set up 2 accounts under his mother's maiden name 11 years ago, both feed a trust. The trust's sole beneficiary is Callie." Amara didn't move. "That's not unusual. Parents set up trusts for children. 11 years ago, Callie was 6. Renata's eyes held hers, steady and patient, the way people look at someone they suspect is about to have the floor pulled out from under them. "The trust documents list her under a different last name, not Whitfield. A name that matches a woman named Diane Ferris, who your husband was involved with for 4 years before he met you." A pause, deliberate, giving the words room to land. "I haven't confirmed everything yet, but I don't think Callie is a stranger's child you adopted, Mrs. Whitfield. I think she's your husband's daughter, and I think he's known it the entire time." The coffee shop kept moving around her, a barista calling out an order, a child laughing somewhere near the window, an entire ordinary world continuing exactly as it had a moment before, while Amara sat perfectly still and felt 15 years rearrange themselves into a different shape entirely. Every unequal glance, every time Aliner's hands had reached for one girl and not the other. Every "my daughter" that Richard had never once corrected himself on. It had never been random. It had never been simple favoritism, the kind families sometimes fell into without meaning to. It had been the truth, hiding in plain sight for 15 years. "Keep digging," Amara said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, which surprised her almost as much as the folder had. "I want everything. The mother, the trust, every document with her name on it. And Renata, I want to know exactly what they're planning for the inheritance vote next month, because I don't think this is only about a lie anymore. I think it's about what they intend to do once the lie doesn't matter to them anymore." Renata studied her for a long moment. "You understand what you're asking me to hand you. This isn't a conversation you have quietly over dinner once you know." "I know exactly what I'm asking for." Amara closed the folder and held it against her chest like something that could still be protected, though she already understood, in the deepest part of her, that protection had stopped being possible the moment Callie's fingers closed around Zuri's wrist in front of 200 witnesses who said nothing. "For 15 years, I built a family out of trust. It's time I found out exactly what I actually built." Outside the coffee shop window, a car eased to the curb, sleek, black, unremarkable except for the license plate frame stamped with a Seoul dealership's name, half a world from where it should have been. Amara didn't notice it. She was already 3 steps ahead, already rebuilding, already becoming the version of herself that this family had never once had reason to fear. She had no way of knowing yet how soon that would change. The trust documents took Renata 6 days to fully unravel. And when she finally laid them across Amara's kitchen island, after the housekeeper had gone home, after Richard had left for a board dinner that Amara now suspected wasn't a board dinner at all, the full shape of it finally came into focus. "Diane Ferris," Renata said, tapping a photograph clipped to the top page. A woman in her late 40s now, blonde, tired-looking, standing outside a modest house in Ohio. Callie's biological mother. Richard paid her a lump sum 8 months before you two adopted Callie through the agency. The adoption paperwork lists an anonymous birth mother. It isn't anonymous, it's staged. Staged. Amara repeated the word like it might dissolve if she said it enough times, like language itself could undo what it named. "He arranged for me to adopt his own daughter and told me she came from a stranger. That's what the documents show. If he wanted her raised as his, why the lie?" "Why not just?" Amara stopped. She already knew why. Richard's father, dying at the time, had been obsessive about legacy, about a Whitfield name unmarked by scandal. An affair during his engagement to Amara would have detonated the merger his father had spent a decade brokering. So Richard had buried the truth in an adoption file instead, let his mother in on the secret, and raised his own daughter under his wife's unknowing love for 15 years, while quietly building her a trust that Amara's biological daughter had never been offered. There's more, Renata said, and something in her voice made Amara brace before she'd even heard it. The trust isn't just money, it's controlling shares. 11% of Whitfield Global, structured to transfer to Callie automatically the day she turns 18, which is 3 weeks before the family inheritance vote you mentioned. Combined with what Richard already holds and whatever Aliner's estate carries, that puts effective control of the company in Callie's hands the moment the vote happens. Not yours, not Zuri's, hers. Amara sat very still. 19 years of 2:00 a.m. phone calls with factory managers in 3 languages, of contracts she'd rewritten in hospital waiting rooms during her 3rd miscarriage, because the deal couldn't wait for her grief, of building something with her bare hands out of a company that had been circling bankruptcy the year she met Richard. All of it had been quietly, patiently engineered to end up in the hands of a teenager who called her stepmother under her breath when she thought no one could hear. He's not just protecting a secret, Amara said slowly. He's transferring the entire company to a child who isn't even mine, using a lie I helped fund without knowing it. And once that vote happens, Renata finished, there's no path back. Voting shares don't reverse themselves because a wife finally learns the truth. Callie's behavior, in the weeks that followed, grew bolder in a way that only made sense once Amara understood what was underneath it. She stopped bothering to hide her contempt for Zuri entirely, snide comments at breakfast about real Whitfields. A photo posted and deleted within minutes showing Zuri's bedroom door with a slur scrawled in lipstick that Callie blamed, unconvincingly, on some girl from school. Aliner defended her every time, reflexively, the way a person defends a hand from a hot stove without conscious thought. She's under pressure, Aliner told Amara over lunch, when Amara finally confronted her about the lipstick. The inheritance vote is stressful for a young girl. You have no idea what it's like, waiting to see if the family truly values you. I have a very good idea, Amara said, and something in her tone made Aliner's spoon pause halfway to her mouth. I've spent 15 years waiting to see if this family truly valued the daughter I raised with my own body. So don't tell me about waiting, Aliner. Tell me why your granddaughter thinks she's entitled to threaten mine. Aliner's face did something complicated, a flicker of something that might, in a kinder woman, have been shame, before it hardened back into practiced composure. Callie has always understood her place in this family more clearly than some people give her credit for. It wasn't a slip. Amara heard it for exactly what it was, an admission wearing the costume of an insult. Her place. Not earned place. Not chosen place. A place that had been decided for her before she'd ever done anything to deserve or dishonor it. The same as it had been decided, in the opposite direction, for Zuri. Amara said nothing further. She finished her lunch, kissed Aliner's cheek at the door with a warmth she no longer felt even slightly, and went home to call Renata and ask her to move faster. It was Zuri who found the boyfriend problem first, in the accidental way teenagers find each other's secrets. A screenshot forwarded through 3 group chats before it reached her, of Callie's boyfriend, a 24-year-old club promoter named Trey, joking to his friends about marrying into old money the second the ink dries, and being done, playing house with a 17-year-old the moment her trust matured. She doesn't even know he said this, Zuri told her mother, sliding her phone across the table with the particular fierce satisfaction of a younger sister who has, for once, been handed a weapon instead of a wound. Should I tell her? Amara looked at the screenshot for a long moment. Anger first, a hot, protective flare because whatever Callie had done, she was still 17, still someone's child, still being used by a grown man circling money he had no right to. Then something colder and more useful settled underneath it. No, Amara said. Not yet. Send it to Renata instead. I want to know everything about Trey Doyle before anyone confronts anyone. You're not going to protect her. It wasn't quite a question. I didn't say that. Amara reached across and squeezed her daughter's hand. I'm going to find out exactly how deep this goes before I decide who deserves protecting and who's already made their choice. There's a difference, baby. I need you to trust me on the difference. Zuri studied her mother's face the way she'd started doing more and more in recent weeks, searching for the woman she'd always known, the one who apologized for other people's cruelty and hoped things would simply improve, and finding instead someone new taking shape underneath, someone with a colder kind of patience Zuri had never seen in her before. Scaring me a little, Zuri admitted. Good, Amara said, and for the first time in weeks, something that might almost have been a smile crossed her face. I'd rather scare the people who deserve it than keep being scared myself. Renata's report on Trey Doyle arrived 4 days later, and it was worse than either of them had guessed. 2 prior relationships with wealthy, underage girlfriends, a pattern of debt that vanished suspiciously fast whenever those relationships ended, and a series of texts to a friend subpoenaed years earlier in an unrelated harassment case, and still sitting in a public court record if you knew where to look. Boasting about writing the inheritance out of his previous girlfriend before her family had gotten wise and cut him off, Amara read every page twice. Then she called Renata with a request that made even the investigator go quiet on the other end of the line. "I don't want this exposed to the family yet," Amara said. "I want it exposed publicly. At the inheritance ceremony, in front of everyone who spent 15 years deciding my daughter wasn't worth their attention. I want Callie to understand exactly what kind of man she's been defending, and I want Richard and Alina to understand exactly what kind of judgment they've been rewarding, all at once, where they can't quietly manage the fallout in private. That's not due diligence anymore, Mrs. Whitfield. That's a plan." "It's both," Amara said. "Can you help me build it or not?" There was a long pause on the line, long enough that Amara wondered if she'd finally asked for something even Renata's steady nerve balked at. "I can help you build it," Renata said finally. "But you should know something else I found while I was digging into Doyle's finances. One of his recent debts, the one that mysteriously vanished 8 weeks ago, was paid off by a wire transfer from a Seoul-based investment holding company. I ran the parent entity 3 times because I didn't believe it the first time." A pause, deliberate. "It traces back to a man named Min Seo. Forbes ranked him the wealthiest self-made investor in South Korea last year. And according to public records from 19 years ago, Mrs. Whitfield, he once held a small minority stake in Whitfield Textiles, back before it was Whitfield Global. Back before you married into it." Amara went very still, the phone pressed hard against her ear, the kitchen suddenly too quiet around her. "That's not possible," she said, though even as she said it, she was already reaching backward through 19 years to a boardroom, a quiet man who'd looked at her like she was the only intelligent person in the room, a dinner invitation she had turned down for a balcony proposal instead. Why would he be involved with Trey Doyle at all? "I don't know yet," Renata admitted. "But somebody paid off your daughter's boyfriend's debt 8 weeks ago, from a company controlled by a man with a direct, personal history with this family that predates your marriage. That's not a coincidence I'm comfortable ignoring, and neither should you." Amara set the phone down slowly on the counter, her hand not quite steady, staring out the kitchen window at the dark shape of a car she suddenly, belatedly remembered. Sleek, black, Seoul dealership plates, idling outside a coffee shop 3 weeks ago while she sat inside learning her family was built on a lie. He hadn't simply reappeared in her life by accident. He had already been watching, long before she'd known there was anything worth watching for. Min Seo's office occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Gangnam, and Amara had flown 11 hours to stand outside its door without telling a single person where she'd gone. Not Renata, not Zuri, not even herself, fully, until the elevator doors opened and she was already walking toward him. He rose from behind his desk the moment she entered, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. 19 years had sharpened the lines of his face, silvered the edges of his hair, but the way he looked at her hadn't changed. The same unhurried, complete attention she remembered from a boardroom half a lifetime ago. "You paid off Trey Doyle's debt," Amara said, before he could offer her a chair, before either of them could pretend this was a social call. "Why?" "Sit down, Amara." "Why?" Min studied her for a moment, then walked to the window instead of answering immediately, looking out over a skyline he'd built his fortune inside of. "Because I've had someone watching your husband's company for 6 years," he said finally. "Not you. Him. I invested in Whitfield Textiles 19 years ago because of one restructuring plan written by a 26-year-old analyst nobody else in that room was smart enough to listen to. I pulled my stake 2 years later when Richard Whitfield tried to renegotiate my terms behind your back, the week after your wedding, banking on the fact that you'd never see the paperwork. I've watched that company from a distance ever since, Amara, Because I never stopped believing the only reason it survived its first decade was you. That still doesn't explain Trey Doyle. When my people flagged a young club promoter with a pattern of preying on wealthy underage girls attaching himself to your husband's family, I made sure his debts vanished. Minyi turned back to face her. Not to protect him, to make sure nothing forced his hand before you had the full picture. A desperate man makes desperate choices, Amara. I didn't want him desperate before you were ready to move. You've been managing my family's crisis from another continent without my knowledge. Been protecting the people you love while you gathered what you needed to protect them yourself, he said, and there was no apology in his voice, only a quiet, unwavering certainty that made her chest ache in a way she didn't have language for yet. I'm not going to pretend that's the same as staying out of it. I made a choice 19 years ago to let you walk toward a life I thought would make you happy, and I have spent every year since watching from far enough away to respect that choice. But I am done pretending I don't still care what happens to you, Amara. I never stopped. Office was very quiet. Outside, the city went on without them, indifferent to the 19 years folded into the space between two people who had once sat across a table from each other and recognized something neither had been ready to name. I chose him, Amara said finally, quietly, not as an accusation but as a fact she was still, after everything, trying to make sense of. I chose a future I thought I understood, and it turned out to be built on a lie I helped fund without knowing it. I know. Minyi crossed the room and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head to hold his gaze. I'm not asking you to regret that choice or to explain it to me. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you while you finish dismantling the parts of it that were never honest to begin with. After that, only after that, you can decide whether there's room in whatever comes next for a man who never stopped keeping his eye on the door, hoping you'd walk back through it. Amara didn't answer him with words. She reached out instead and took his hand, the first time she'd allowed herself to touch him in 19 years, and felt something in her chest unclench that she hadn't realized she'd been holding rigid since the night Callie's fingers closed around her daughter's wrist. Inheritance vote is in 9 days, she said. I need everything you have on Trey Doyle, on the trust, on all of it organized and airtight, not to protect me, to make sure that when I finally say what needs saying, no one in that room has anywhere left to hide. You'll have it by morning. He didn't let go of her hand. And Amara, whatever happens in that room, you won't be standing in it alone, not this time. The morning of the ceremony, Callie descended the Whitfield staircase in a white gown Alina had chosen for her, radiant with the particular confidence of someone who has been told her entire life that the world will eventually confirm what she already believes about herself. Trey waited at the bottom in a tailored suit he couldn't have afforded a year ago, smiling the practiced smile of a man counting days. You look like you're about to be crowned, Zuri said flatly, watching from the hallway in the plain navy dress Amara had picked for her, deliberately understated, deliberately unremarkable, a choice Zuri hadn't understood until her mother explained, quietly, the night before. Let them underestimate us both one more time. It's the last time it will cost us anything. I'm about to be crowned, Callie said, not even bothering to look at her. In about 2 hours, this company stops pretending it belongs to some outsider's daughter and starts belonging to an actual Whitfield. She adjusted an earring in the hallway mirror. You should enjoy today, Zuri. It's the last one where anyone in this family has to be polite to you. Zuri's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, exactly as her mother had asked. Amara, coming down the stairs behind her in deep emerald silk, heard every word of it and felt no fear at all. Only a cold, settled clarity, the particular calm of a woman who has spent 3 weeks building a case and has finally arrived at the only day that matters. Careful, Callie, Amara said, passing her without slowing. The last thing a person should do before a crowning is insult the people who might be standing closer to the crown than she thinks. Callie laughed, an easy, dismissive sound. You're not even really her mother. The hallway went silent. Richard, descending the stairs a step behind Amara, froze completely. And in that single frozen second, before he managed to compose his face, before he managed to say, Callie, that's not true in a voice too slow and too careful to be convincing, Amara had her answer. Not from Renata's documents, not from Minyi's investigators, from her own husband's face, caught for exactly one unguarded second in genuine, undisguised panic. He knew, he had always known, and some small, cowardly part of him had just confirmed it in front of both his daughters, in the one unguarded moment he couldn't take back. We'll finish this conversation at the ceremony, Amara said softly, and there was something in her voice that made even a leaner, arriving at the bottom of the stairs in blue silk, go quiet. All of us, in front of everyone. Ballroom filled with the same 200 faces that had witnessed the wine-stained dress 3 weeks earlier, gathered now beneath a banner reading WHITFILD Global. A legacy continued, champagne already circulating, a string quartet already playing something bright and celebratory that Amara found almost unbearably ironic given what she knew was coming. Richard took the podium first, as planned, speaking in the smooth, practiced cadences of a man who had given 100 versions of this speech in his head. 19 years ago, my father built the foundation of this company. Today, I'm honored to formalize the next chapter of the Whitfield legacy. Before you formalize anything, Amara said, rising from her seat and walking to the front of the room without waiting to be invited. I think this family owes everyone here the truth about what legacy actually means in this house. Quartet stopped mid-phrase. 200 faces turned toward her at once, the exact silence she remembered from the gala, except this time she wasn't standing in it defending her daughter from an accusation. This time she was the one bringing the accusation, and she had spent 3 weeks and 11 hours of flight time making absolutely certain it would land exactly where it needed to. 15 years ago, Amara began, her voice steady, carrying easily across the room. My husband told me we were adopting an anonymous infant whose birth mother wished to remain unknown. That was a lie. Callie's biological mother is a woman named Diane Ferris, whom Richard was involved with for 4 years before he met me. Richard has known Callie was his biological daughter since the day we brought her home. So has his mother. Eleanor's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody moved at all. Amara, Richard started. Not finished. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room had gone so silent that a whisper would have carried to the back wall. 11 years ago, Richard set up a trust in his mother's maiden name, funneling controlling shares of this company to Callie the moment she turns 18, 3 weeks before today's vote was scheduled. Engineered so that whatever happened in this room, this afternoon would already be a formality. He built an entire legal architecture to make sure the daughter he never publicly claimed would inherit everything, while the daughter I gave birth to would inherit nothing, but the suspicion this family has directed at her for 15 years. Callie's face had gone white, her earlier crown-shaped confidence draining out of her in real time. Trey, beside her, had already begun edging toward the exit, and Amara turned to him next, unhurried, merciless. And you. She let the silence stretch just long enough for every phone in the room to be raised, recording. Trey Doyle, 24 years old. This is your 3rd relationship with a wealthy underage girl in 5 years, and there are court records, public searchable court records, where you boast about doing exactly this. Writing an inheritance out before the family gets wise enough to cut you off. She turned to Callie, and her voice softened, just slightly, just enough for the girl to hear the difference. He isn't marrying you, Callie. He's marrying whatever this family was about to hand you. I know that's not what you want to hear today, but it's the only true thing anyone in this room has told you in a long time. Callie's mouth opened, closed. For the first time in 15 years, Amara watched something crack open in her adopted daughter's face that wasn't entitlement. Something smaller, younger, more frightened. The face of a 17-year-old suddenly realizing the ground she'd been standing on had never been solid at all. Richard stepped toward the podium, his composure finally, visibly shattering. This is not the venue for. This is exactly the venue, Amara said, and for the first time she turned to face him fully, 19 years of built silence finally breaking open in front of everyone who had ever benefited from her staying quiet. You built your legacy on my labor, and your lies in equal measure, Richard, and you were about to hand it to the one person in this family who spent every day proving she learned exactly the wrong lessons from watching you do it. So no. This is precisely the venue, because the last time a Whitfield humiliated my daughter in front of this many witnesses, every single one of you stayed silent. She looked out at the room, at faces she'd smiled at for 15 years without ever once seeing clearly. I'm not staying silent today, and before this vote happens, every person in this room is going to know exactly whose judgment they've been trusting with the future of this company. Behind her, near the ballroom's double doors, A figure in a dark gray suit stepped quietly inside, unannounced, unhurried, carrying a leather folder Amara recognized instantly, because she'd asked for it herself 11 hours ago, on the other side of the world. Minyi Seo had come to finish what she'd started. The room turned as one toward the doors, and for a moment nobody understood why a stranger in a tailored gray suit was crossing the ballroom floor with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once, in his life, needed to explain his presence anywhere. Then Richard saw his face, and every drop of color left his own. Minyi Seo, Richard said, the name coming out of him like something forced. Mr. Whitfield. Minyi inclined his head, courteous and utterly unbothered, and set the leather folder on the podium beside Amara. You'll remember me, I think. I held a small stake in your father's company 19 years ago. I pulled out 2 years into your marriage when I discovered you'd tried to renegotiate my terms behind your wife's back, betting she'd never see the paperwork. He let that settle, unhurried, before continuing. I kept watching this company anyway, not because of you. Because I never stopped believing the only reason it survived its first decade was the woman standing beside me now. A murmur ran through the ballroom, the particular electric murmur of 200 people realizing, in real time, that they were watching something they'd be describing to each other for years. This is a private family matter, Alina said, finding her voice at last, though it came out thinner than Amara had ever heard it. It stopped being private the moment your family engineered a corporate inheritance around a lie, Minyi said, not unkindly, simply factually, the way a man states something he has already proven 3 times over. Everything in this folder is independently verified. The Diane Ferris payments, the trust structured to bypass shareholder disclosure requirements, Trey Doyle's financial history. He looked at Richard directly. I'd advise your board's counsel to review it before this vote proceeds any further, because several of these documents suggest violations that go well beyond a family dispute. Richard's mouth worked without producing sound. Amara watched 19 years of careful control finally, completely collapse across her husband's face, and felt, to her own surprise, no triumph in it at all, only a tired, aching clarity, the particular grief of watching someone confirm, at last, exactly who they had always been. Want a divorce, Amara said quietly to Richard, though the whole room heard it. And I want it on record today that I am formally withdrawing my support for this inheritance vote until an independent forensic audit of every trust and transfer in this company is complete. She turned to the room. I built this company's survival with my own hands for 19 years. I will not stand here and watch it handed to whoever benefited most from lying to me about it. Board didn't need the vote. Within 72 hours, 3 major institutional investors, clients Amara herself had personally cultivated over a decade of 2:00 a.m. calls and international flights nobody else had been willing to take, froze their positions pending the audit results. A 4th withdrew entirely. By the end of the week, Whitfield Global's stock had lost 11% of its value, and the calls Richard placed to steady his oldest relationships went, one after another, unanswered. Not calling back, he told his lawyer, disbelieving, 3 days into the collapse. I built relationships with these people for 20 years. They didn't build relationships with you, the lawyer said carefully. Every account note in this company's history has your wife's name on the follow-up. They trusted her judgment, not your signature. It was, in the end, exactly what Amara had told him in the ballroom, delivered now not by her, but by the market itself, in a language men like Richard understood far better than anything she could have said to his face. Callie's collapse came differently, and faster. With the trust frozen pending audit and her father's reputation in free fall, Trey Doyle disappeared within a week. No goodbye, no confrontation, simply gone, his number disconnected, the promises about a future she would never inherit evaporating along with him. Callie, desperate and humiliated and running out of people willing to defend her, made one final catastrophic mistake. She went to her father with a document she'd found in his home office months earlier, unsigned, a side agreement that would have quietly transferred a controlling operational stake to a shell company Richard had set up in case the family ever needed to move assets beyond reach of a hostile audit. She didn't understand what she was holding. She only understood that Trey had once told her. In a rare unguarded moment, that documents like that were how people protect what actually matters. And she wanted, desperately, one more thing that mattered to hold on to. She forged her father's signature and submitted it to the board's outside counsel herself, hoping to prove her own value to a family that had never once asked what she was capable of. It was, instead, the single piece of evidence that made the fraud case against Richard Whitfield unassailable. The trial took 4 months. Amara did not attend most of it. She had learned, by then, the particular strength required to let consequences unfold without her standing in the room to witness every moment of someone else's reckoning. Richard was convicted on 3 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of falsifying adoption records. The last charge, ironically, the one that carried the heaviest public shame, because it was the one every ordinary person in the courtroom gallery could understand without a single line of financial testimony. He was sentenced to 6 years. Eleanor's role was harder to prosecute, but impossible to forgive. She lost her seat on the board, lost the deference 200 gala guests had once extended her without question, and lost, most of all, the granddaughter she'd spent 15 years elevating above another child. Because Callie, in the aftermath, wanted nothing to do with either of them. She came to Amara instead. Not immediately. It took 3 months, a lawyer, a carefully worded letter, and finally a single unannounced visit to the modest house Amara had rented after the divorce, where she found Callie standing on the porch in the rain, 17 going on someone much older, holding nothing, asking for nothing except to be let inside. "No, I don't deserve to be here," Callie said, not looking up. "I know what I did to Zuri. I know what I said to you. Her voice broke. "I don't have anyone else who ever actually wanted me for me. I don't even know if that's ever been true. I don't know who I am without all of it." Amara looked at her for a long moment. This girl she had held as an infant in a fluorescent-lit waiting room and loved without a single reservation for 15 years, before any of them knew the truth. This girl who had been raised, deliberately, by the adults around her to believe entitlement was the same thing as love. "Not your father's lie," Amara said finally, stepping back from the door to let her in out of the rain. "And you're not the daughter Eleanor built for her own comfort. I don't know who that leaves you to become. But I know it isn't going to be decided on my porch tonight, and it isn't going to be decided by anyone but you." She paused. "You hurt my daughter badly, Callie. That's not something I can pretend away, and it's not something you get to skip past because you finally understand what was done to you, too. But you can start over. Just not by walking straight past the person you need to make it right with first." Zuri, watching from the hallway, didn't run to embrace her. That reconciliation, when it came slower. Months of careful, awkward conversation, of Callie learning to apologize without performing it, of Zuri learning to believe an apology could be real without erasing what had come before it. But it came, eventually, in its own time, the way most honest things do. Minyi did not push. That was, Amara realized in the months that followed, the truest measure of the difference between the 2 men she had loved in her life. One had spent 19 years quietly engineering her dependence on him, and the other spent the first year after her divorce simply being present, in Seoul or in the States, whichever she needed, asking for nothing beyond permission to remain close. It was Zuri, in the end, who made the decision easy. "You should marry him," she told her mother one evening, 8 months after the ceremony, the 2 of them sharing takeout on the small kitchen island of the house that finally, fully, belonged to no one but them. "I like him. He actually asks me things and waits for the answer instead of deciding what I think before I say it." She stole a piece of Amara's food, unbothered, the way she'd started doing again now that the house was quiet enough for ordinary teenage things. "And he looks at you like you're the only person in every room, even when the room is full of people way more important than you or me. You notice that." Zuri rolled her eyes with the particular fondness of a daughter who has finally, after everything, gotten her mother fully back. "Everybody's noticed that. I'm just the only one brave enough to say it to your face." Minyi proposed 3 weeks later, on a balcony overlooking a Seoul skyline he had spent 30 years building his place inside of. And this time, Amara said yes without a single hesitation clouding the answer. Not because the balcony was more impressive than the one Richard had offered her 19 years earlier, but because for the first time in her adult life, She understood the difference between a proposal that asked her to become someone's foundation and one that simply asked to stand beside the foundation she had already built herself. If you've made it this far with Amara, Zuri, and Minyi, I'd love to know, what part of this story hit you hardest? Was it the ballroom, the trust, or the moment Zuri finally got to choose who stood beside her mother? Subscribe if stories like this move you the way this one moved me writing it. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that being underestimated is never the end of the story. And tell me in the comments the biggest lesson you're walking away with tonight. 2 years later, on a quiet evening in Seoul, Amara stood on that same balcony watching Zuri and Minyi argue cheerfully over a chessboard neither of them was taking seriously, and thought back to a boardroom half a lifetime ago, to a woman 26 years old who had believed love meant choosing the safest bridge across an uncertain future. She understood now what that woman hadn't yet learned, that the people who are truly worth building a life beside are never the ones who need you to prove your value before they'll extend you their respect. They're the ones who saw it plainly, the very first time, and simply waited, patiently, without demand, for the day you were finally ready to see it in yourself.